Most people think hating small talk means you're antisocial. Psychologists think it means something completely different. In fact, there's a specific personality trait, measured in labs, studied for decades, that predicts exactly how much small talk a person can tolerate before they want to walk out of the room. And if you've ever stood at a party, nodding along to a conversation about the weather, thinking I would rather be literally anywhere else, this video is going to explain exactly why that happens. And honestly, it might make you feel a lot better about yourself. Stay with me. Before we get into the psychology, I want to plant a question in your mind that I'm going to answer by the end of this video. Because there are actually two completely different reasons people hate small talk, and they come from opposite ends of the psychological spectrum. One is about how deeply you process the world. The other is about fear. Most people who think they hate small talk for the first reason, they're actually dealing with the second one too, and they don't even know it. By the end of this video, you'll be able to tell which one is driving you, and what to actually do about it. But first, let's talk about what small talk actually is. Because I think we've all been getting this slightly wrong. Here's a question nobody asks. Why does small talk exist at all? Because it feels useless, right? How are you? Good. You? Yeah, good. Nobody learned anything. Nobody connected. What was the point? Anthropologists have a really interesting answer to this. Small talk isn't about information exchange. It was never designed to be. Small talk is a safety ritual. Think about how primates greet each other. They groom, they touch, they signal, I'm not a threat. You're safe around me. Small talk is the human version of that. It's not what you say, it's the act of saying it that matters, which tells us something really important about the people who hate it. In 1996, psychologist Elaine Aron published research on a trait she called sensory processing sensitivity, more commonly known today as being a highly sensitive person, or SHSP. Now, before you roll your eyes at that, this isn't a self-help buzzword. This is a neurologically measurable difference in how brains process stimulation. HSPs, roughly 15 to 20% of the population, have nervous systems that process everything more deeply. Sounds, emotions, sensory input, social interactions. And here's where small talk becomes a problem for them. When an HSP engages in a conversation, their brain is running significantly more processing than an average person's. They're reading micro-expressions. They're thinking about subtext. They're feeling the emotional undercurrent of the room. Small talk demands they run all of that processing power for a conversation about weekend plans. It's not that they hate people. It's that the cost-to-reward ratio of small talk feels catastrophically bad to their brain. A 10-minute conversation about nothing drains them the way a 1-hour meaningful conversation might drain someone else. And here's the part worth holding on to. Research by Matthias Mail at the University of Arizona found that people who engaged in more substantive conversation, not small talk, reported significantly higher levels of well-being. But that effect was much stronger for people high in the depth processing trait. In other words, for certain brains, meaningful conversation isn't just more enjoyable. It's actually closer to a biological need. Does that resonate with anyone? Let me know in the comments. Do you feel drained by small talk, or is it just mildly annoying? I'm genuinely curious where people land on this. Okay, but here's where it gets more complicated, because I just described people who hate small talk as deep thinkers with rich inner lives who crave meaningful connection. And that sounds great. That sounds like a compliment. But what if I told you that for a lot of people, that story is a defense mechanism? What if the real reason some people hate small talk has nothing to do with depth and everything to do with anxiety? Social anxiety and introversion are two completely different things, but they are deeply, inconveniently tangled together, and a lot of people confuse one for the other. Here's how to tell the difference. An introvert who dislikes small talk will feel drained by it, but not necessarily afraid of it. They might engage fine, they just don't want to. Someone with social anxiety who dislikes small talk feels something different. They feel threatened by it. Small talk is uniquely terrifying for socially anxious people. And here's the psychological reason why. In structured conversations, debates, work discussions, even arguments, there are rules, there's a script. You know what's expected of you. Small talk has no script, it's improvised, spontaneous. You're expected to be witty and warm and effortlessly engaging, without preparation, while being judged by someone you may have just met. Psychologists call this evaluation apprehension, the fear of being negatively judged. And research consistently shows it peaks in exactly the kind of low-stakes, ambiguous social situations that small talk creates. The irony is brutal. The less the conversation matters, the more anxious some people become. Because there's nothing to hide behind. No expertise, no agenda, just you being likable. And for some brains, that's the most terrifying ask in the world. So ask yourself honestly, when you say you hate small talk because it's meaningless, is that the whole truth? Or is some part of you also relieved that you have a reason to avoid a thing that makes you nervous? I'm not judging, I've asked myself the same question. Here's something I find genuinely fascinating. We've been talking about two types of people who hate small talk: deep processors and anxious avoiders. But there's a third type that almost nobody talks about, and honestly, this one's the most interesting. Some people don't hate small talk because it drains them. They don't hate it because it scares them. They hate it because it feels fake. There's a concept in psychology called self-monitoring, the degree to which a person adjusts their behavior to match social expectations. High self-monitors are socially flexible. They can code switch, they can work a room. They're not necessarily fake. They're just skilled at social performance. Low self-monitors are different. They have a very strong need for consistency between how they feel inside and how they present themselves to the world. Small talk, for a low self-monitor, feels like being asked to perform a version of themselves that doesn't exist. How are you? Great. When actually you're exhausted and your rent is due and you had a weird dream that unsettled you this morning. For low self-monitors, that gap between social performance and inner reality creates a specific kind of discomfort. Not anxiety, not depletion. Inauthenticity distress. Research on authenticity by Michael Kernis and Brian Goldman found that people who score high on what they call self-alienation, the sense of not knowing or not expressing their true self, consistently report lower well-being, more negative emotions, and more social dissatisfaction. Small talk isn't just boring to these people. It feels like a small act of self-betrayal every time they engage in it. Which of these three resonates with you most? The depth processor, the anxious avoider, or the authenticity seeker? Comment below. I want to see which one this audience is. Now here's the thing I haven't said yet, and it reframes everything. Hating small talk doesn't mean you're bad at connecting with people. Often it means the opposite. But there's a trap that a lot of deep, sensitive, authenticity-seeking people fall into, and it's quietly making their social lives worse. Here's the trap. Because small talk feels shallow and because it feels costly or fake or nerve-wracking, many people who hate it start avoiding social situations altogether. And that feels like self-care. It feels like honoring your nature. But research on loneliness tells us something uncomfortable. People who consistently avoid low-depth social interaction end up more lonely, not less. Because here's what small talk actually does when you understand its real function. Small talk is the door, not the room. Nobody skips from strangers to deep friendship. The path always goes through small talk first. The uncomfortable, shallow, nice weather we're having phase is the entry point to every meaningful relationship you've ever had. Psychologist Jeffrey Hall at the University of Kansas studied how long it takes to develop close friendships. His research found it takes roughly 50 hours to move from acquaintance to casual friend and 200 hours to reach close friendship. A lot of those early hours, they're small talk hours, when you skip that phase entirely, when you only allow yourself to engage in deep conversation. You're essentially trying to build a house starting from the second floor. So what do you actually do with this? 3 things. Quick. 1. Reframe what small talk is for. Stop evaluating small talk by the content. Start noticing what it's building. That 3-minute conversation about your colleague's weekend? That's not meaningless. That's 3 minutes toward the 50 hours. You're making a deposit, not having a conversation. 2. If anxiety is your driver, get curious instead of impressive. The research on social anxiety is clear. The more you focus on being liked, the worse you perform. The more you focus on being curious, actually interested in the other person, the more likable you actually become. Ask one real question. 1. And actually listen to the answer. 3. If inauthenticity is your driver, give yourself permission to be a little real. Small talk doesn't have to be entirely hollow. How are you? Can be answered with, honestly, a bit tired, but glad to be here. And watch how fast the conversation shifts. You don't have to bare your soul. You just have to let a sliver of the real you show up. Most people are so relieved when someone drops the social performance, even slightly, because they're performing too, and they're exhausted. So why do some people hate small talk? Because their brain processes depth and stimulation differently, or because improvised social performance triggers real fear, or because every hollow exchange feels like a quiet betrayal of who they actually are. Usually, it's some combination of all three, and none of those things are flaws. They're just maps. Maps of how your particular brain is wired. And once you understand the map, you can navigate the territory a lot more skillfully. The people who are best at meaningful connection, they didn't get there by avoiding the shallow end. They learned to move through it, quickly, intentionally, on their way to somewhere deeper. If this video made you think about yourself or someone you know differently, that's exactly what I make this channel for. Hit subscribe if you want more psychology content that actually applies to your real life. No textbook language, no oversimplification. And leave me a comment with which of the 3 types resonated most. I read every single one, and I'll be replying in the first hour after this goes live. And if you related a little too hard to the authenticity seeker, same. See you in the next one.